Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon, the podcast, where we dive deep into all things health and wellness to help you find health and healing inside and out for now and forever. Hello and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon, the podcast. We are so excited to be here and be able to share this. If you're not familiar with us as a practice or us on social media, we are a holistic health practice and we focus on helping people find the root causes of their chronic health issues so that they can heal once and for good. And my name is Megan Abbott. I'm the owner and founder of the practice Trifecta Collective. And this is Shannon Callery, our head practitioner. And we decided to start a podcast to be able to share in longer form than on a lot of our other platforms here, more about what we do as a practice, about do deeper dives into different health issues that we commonly see, testing, protocols, healing, things that we're super interested in. We're definitely going to talk more about like trauma and nervous system regulation, along with like all kinds of gut issues and inflammatory issues and all kinds of stuff. And we're just really excited to be able to dive deeper and to do a longer form of education and connection and content and be able to build a different and bigger community while we're also sharing some more information. So thank you for joining us today in this first episode. We're just going to share a little bit more about us. We'll talk a little bit about the practice here as well, outside of what I just shared. But we really just want to share a little bit more about us. If you are familiar with us already, you've probably seen me and my face, maybe my story somewhere on social media. But I'm going to go a little bit longer form today and sharing a little bit more about me. But my guess is that you probably don't know my co-host Shannon here very well, and we've been working together for over a year now, and we've developed a great working relationship and I think a friendship, and so I really want you guys to be able to get to know her as well here. So I'm going to take a break from talking and I'm going to let her share a little bit more about herself, her story, how she got here, just more about her background, both like personal and what drove her into becoming a holistic health practitioner. And then also like some of the things that she does and she's passionate about here in the health and wellness industry. So Shannon, I will turn the tables over to you and let you go ahead here for a little bit.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited for this. Megan and I have been talking about this for a while, and we're finally putting it into play. So very excited. As far as story goes, so I am a nutritional therapist and a functional blood chemistry specialist. And I also went to school for public health with a focus on community education. So it's always so tough with a story, like where do I start? I had health issues as a child, like lots of GI stuff. So many different things. Really in the long term, kind of same old, a lot of what we hear in the holistic health world got passed around between lots of different doctors, tried tons of different testing, medications, that ultimately didn't help me that much, kind of left me really, really frustrated, unheard, feeling unvalidated, just not a lot of answers. So that's when I moved into kind of playing with my diet and nutrition to see, what could help me from there. And honestly, back then, the quote unquote fad diets weren't even like really fad diets then. They were still like very new things coming to the table, but I just dived in and did a lot of research on my own. And, some of the things helped. It always helped to learn about like quality of food and whatnot. Some of my stomach issues got better, but in the end, I actually ended up with an eating disorder from trying all these different diets, like orthorexia, huge fear of food. And that kind of led me down a completely different path. Excuse me. And that was when I went to the NTA that I actually realized the habits that I was doing while I was eating were very unhealthy. So, that school was played a really big role in my healing journey as far as like education that I learned and helping to heal myself. Yeah. So once I fully healed from my eating disorder, and that was really, that took a long time, like 5 or 6 years. I still was noticing that there was some health issues there. And that's kind of when I dove into the mold stuff. And I actually, I had done a ton of testing, like Megan, you're familiar with this, like the oat testing, mycotoxin stuff. And no one was piecing together the testing the way that it should have been put together. So a lot of things were missed along my journey, which I know you and I are both like pretty passionate about, like making sure testing is read the right way just because of that. And no one really looked at blood work for me either. That was another thing that was hugely missed. But yeah, so I went down this mold journey after I healed from the eating disorder and kind of felt like a normal person again. And I really got into the energy work with that. That was a huge piece of my healing for mold. I could not have done it without that. And yeah, I dove down into that path and finally wrapped that up probably within the last year and a half. Yeah, and that was a huge thing for me too. Nothing really got better, fully better, until I was able to get that mold out of my body. That was truly when the majority of my GI symptoms went away. In addition to the stress and the trauma factor, which is a constant, much better than it used to be, but that's such a huge piece of that's an ongoing thing always. So yeah, in a short summary, that is a large part of my story. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure as we go along, I'm sure we will dive deeper into a lot of these topics here. But before I share my story, just like a couple big highlights that, really drew me to Shannon and to bring her on into the practice. And, a couple reasons why we work so well together is, this story, this picture of doing all of these testing, like doing all of these things, and like no one really putting the pieces together for us. And we ended up having to do a lot of this ourselves, which is a big reason why we have this practice. So people don't have to go through a lot of what we had to go through during our own healing journeys. And it doesn't, instead of taking years and years and years, it can take months to maybe a year, maybe a little over a year, kind of depending on the person and what they're dealing with. But cutting that time in pieces, and also a whole lot less money that we had to spend on all the tests, on all of the actual like practitioner time, and then the supplements. Sometimes dozens and dozens of supplements that we were on, and that's a huge piece, and that's so important for us. And kind of the other big piece that we're going to do lots of episodes on this is the trauma healing and nervous system regulation piece. And anytime we do a deeper dive into, I will say, pretty much any health issue that we talk about, this will come up because we feel so passionately about this. And this is something that was game changing for both of us in our own healing journeys. And I mean, and here's the thing, I'm sure we will continue to talk about this, especially in our own lives, because are you ever really done? I'm going to say probably not. I don't know. But I think there's always some sort of healing work that you can do, trying to become more aware of yourself, trying to heal yourself a little bit more, healing patterns, healing thought patterns, or releasing things from the body that's been stored. So this will be a huge topic of us and this podcast, because this is so important. We talk about this so much with all of our clients here in our practice. And it's also hugely missed in this world.
Yeah.
And very few people talk about it. And even if they are talking about it, a lot of times they're just doing that and not doing the other stuff, or they're like barely scraping the surface of it, which also doesn't always allow us to heal.
Yeah. And you and I both know very well that it is an ongoing thing. Like you can do as much therapeutic work with supplements and do all the testing. And there comes to a point where like, it's not going to work anymore if you don't have control over your stress. It's just how it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So great. Well, thank you for sharing, Shannon. And so I will go, and I tell my story a lot. So I'm going to give you a pretty deep dive here. So I will definitely be talking here for a bit. So I grew up with a single parent, single mom, alcoholic up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And my first memory, and this has changed a little bit, but I still don't have full memories before this. But my first real memory is realizing my mom had an issue with alcohol at the age of 7. And so that just, launched a whole series of childhood trauma, dealing with just one parent, having an absent parent. I met my father once growing up. We do have a relationship now, but that really began in my early 20s. And then, an alcoholic parent, if you have ever been around an alcoholic, probably can guess some of the things that I dealt with and saw and experienced. So I mean, brief overview on the trauma piece here. Certainly emotional trauma, absent parent, a lot of like, for me, always trying to read her and understand like, what do I need to be in that situation so I'm not yelled at and berated and belittled. Fortunately, I did not experience physical trauma, but I saw a lot of physical trauma or physical abuse throughout the years that I was still living there. And then I also turned to alcohol pretty young, because that's the only coping mechanism I saw growing up. I didn't have a good role model, and I really didn't have too many other adults in my life to help mitigate this. I had my mom's brother, was definitely around, and that was like her person. So when she got in trouble, that's who she turned to. But once again, I also saw that. So I also like was very careful in my relationships with many, many adults. And so, I started drinking when I was pretty young. I was always like craving attention because that's, once again, like that's the coping mechanism I saw. My mom was single and she dated not the greatest people most of the time throughout my, when I was growing up. And so I fell into that pattern in my early 20s. I was in an abusive relationship, and it took me a while to even realize that, even though I had seen it and promised myself I would never get in it. And I felt, it's really easy to fall right into that. And then looking back, you're like, what was I even doing? But also forgiving myself and giving myself compassion that's where I was at the time. And growing up, I didn't have crazy health issues. I was anorexic for a period of time. It was a control thing. I didn't have control over much of my life, but I could control what I was putting in my body. And so, or lack thereof. Definitely body image issues as a result of that, or leading up to that and then feeding into that. Anxiety and depression, also like real big trigger warning here. I'm going to talk about a few things here in the next couple minutes. I'm going to go blanket trigger warning here. I tried to commit suicide from pretty much 11 to 21. That whole period of time, multiple episodes of trying to hurt myself, of just like cutting. Once again, it was a control thing. It was like me trying to feel, because I just shoved all of my feelings down, because that's what I was taught. I was in therapy for a lot of that time. I was on medication for most of that time. Didn't do a whole lot for me during that whole period of time. Memories that once again are a little hit or miss here. And so I remember having like pretty significant constipation issues. And knowing what I know now, I think like holding on to everything, shoving everything down, that played a big piece. I remember having mono, and I actually had a relapse of mono after I got it, which is pretty unusual. And that played into some health issues later on here. And I was doing fine. And when I graduated from college, I got into a really stressful job, got into the sales industry. I ended up running my own company by the age of 22. I was working 60 to 80 hours pretty consistently. And then I would go out and drink after work, and very little sleep. Eating wasn't the best, obviously given all of those other activities I was participating in. I never had like a significant weight issue, and I would work out here and there, but I got really burnt out at one point, and I was looking for something else. And I started working out and kind of cutting back on some of the drinking and eating. I won't say great, but a little bit better. And it changed my life. And specifically, it changed my mental health. And I was, for the first time in a decade, able to get off of my medications, all of my anti-anxiety and antidepressants. And I was on many, many of these things. And I was able to get off and stay off without being in a terrible place. I definitely was not in a great place at that time, but I was stable enough at that time. And so that's what I decided I wanted to do. So I ended up getting my personal training certification, ended up doing that part-time. I was able to kind of work out with my current position at that time, where I was able to work certain hours and have a little bit more of a flexible schedule. Did that for about a little over a year. Was also doing some group fitness at that time, a lot of like high intensity kind of stuff. And then I got into full-time gym management, and kind of did that in a variety of ways for several years. And then I was in a minor car accident. Really like a minor car accident. Like, it was not a big deal. But that started all kinds of chronic health issues. I started having like really bad chronic back pain, chronic hip pain, sciatica. I like ended up not, and I didn't even realize that at first, but couldn't feel my right leg for almost a year, like all the way down my leg into my foot. And then I started having gut issues, and sleep issues got worse. My sleep was never in a great position, but my sleep issues got worse. Gut issues, inflammatory issues, really chronic fatigue. Like, I would end up sleeping like 8 or 9 hours at night, and then I'd need like a 2 or 3 hour nap in the afternoon. I could not handle staying awake. And I was still trying to keep up with some of the workout stuff. And I was a trainer and manager at that time. So yeah, it was really challenging, and Western medicine didn't provide much for me. I've had 9 procedures done on my back that didn't do much. And one on my hip. I ended up starting to feel my right leg again, which was good, although it was pain, nerve pain primarily, sharp shooting, like that electric shock kind of pain. Then I started turning to functional medicine, had all kinds of tests done, was put on like 20 to 30 supplements and crazy elimination diets for years and years. It got to the point where I was eating like chicken and steak and white rice. And I like didn't feel good, but I went crazy react to these things. And I was still taking all of these supplements. I mean, I spent over $50,000 just trying to heal, with all of these other practitioners and the tests and all the supplements, until I started getting really fed up. And that's when I started to get the education myself. So I went through the Nutritional Therapy Association program. So I'm also a nutritional therapy practitioner. That was a good starting point for me, but it wasn't, the be all end all. I started changing the way I was moving and working out, which helped. And then I really got into a lot of like the functional movement space, and that was helping a lot with my chronic back and hip pain and some of the nerve pain, sciatica. So I specialized in that for a few years, before I still like wasn't feeling great. And I had, at that point, I had been diagnosed with SIBO, IBS, hypothyroid, Hashimoto's, and a variety of other, some other chronic viral issues, and just like some neurological stuff going on. I had one person tell me that I had just like chronic brain damage, because of my level of trauma, and that there was nothing I could do about it, which felt really good at the time. So I decided to get some more education and dive a little bit deeper into these things. And, I went through all kinds of protocols. Oh, I also had crazy cortisol issues. And so it wasn't until like big picture, I finally did some heavy metal testing, and turns out I had some pretty significant heavy metal issues. I had some pretty significant parasite issues that none of the 5 stool tests at like $400 a pop picked up, and all of the gut protocols didn't pick up or address. And then, yeah, I mean, I had the Epstein-Barr virus. And once I cleared that stuff up, I felt a lot better. I still won't say I felt great, but I felt pretty good. And I was like doing okay as a human being at that point. And it wasn't until I started diving deeper into the nervous system regulation piece. And for me, I tried a lot of things. I went to trauma therapy for a little bit. Therapy for me like never did a whole lot in the 10 years that I did it, anywhere between 1 to 3 times a week. But trauma therapy was a little bit different, but it didn't quite. I tried a few different modalities and it didn't quite click for me until I started working with someone who did energy healing. And that's when things finally started to click a little bit more. And it took a little bit, don't get me wrong. I was like, this is crazy. This is weird. This is made up for a while going into this. But I was also so desperate that I was open to trying pretty much anything. And after a few sessions over the course of a couple months, like I started to feel a little bit better, and I started to be able to recognize like patterns that I was doing and start to feel a little bit safer in my body. And that made a really big difference. And then I got anointed as a Reiki practitioner. So I also do energy healing, and I was getting trained in a couple other testing modalities at that point. And then, yeah, I started to feel a lot better. And then for me, like when I found and started to utilize plant medicines and microdosing in larger journey capacities, like that's when things like really, really started to settle for me. And I started to have like massively feel better in a way that I didn't know was possible. And I didn't realize I was living with low levels of anxiety and depression still, and that like some of the cortisol stuff was still going on, until I really started diving deeper into this. And we will do other episodes on this. So I'm not going to go too deep into this, but yeah, it made a really, really big difference in my health journey. And that's where we are now. Doing pretty good now. Always working on things and always learning a lot. But yeah, I've completely reversed my autoimmunity. Haven't had thyroid issues in years. My gut's been in a really good spot by and large for the last many years. Like, generally speaking, I sleep like really well through the night, really good quality sleep. Any anxiety, depression is minimal to none. At all times. So yeah, I mean, it's led me to a really, really good and healed spot. So this is, after all of that, this is why we do what we do, because we don't want other people, and we know other people have to go through what we did, but we want to try to limit to avoid that as much as possible. And in our practice, one of my biggest things that I'm passionate about is giving people the tools, resources, and knowledge that we didn't have, and the support that we didn't have along our journey to help them heal.
Yeah, 100%. And even just like listening to you share your story right now, there's so many things that I feel like I didn't say that we're going to get into in other episodes, but just things that like that I didn't have support on. And I can see within the way that we work with clients, how we frequently meet with them and kind of give them like a line of open access, essentially. Like those were things that I never had when working with a practitioner either. So yeah, I love that you pointed that out, because I do feel like that's something that kind of separates us from other practitioners.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that level of support is needed, especially for a period of time, because things come up and it can be really scary when when these things come up and you don't and you reach out to someone who you're working with, and it takes them days or weeks, or I've heard cases where people just like don't get a response back. And that, I mean, I just remember being in that place. I remember the first elimination diet I was ever on, and I had just started 22 supplements at once. And a really, really strict, like hardcore elimination diet. Somewhere in between, like it wasn't quite a autoimmune paleo, but pretty close to that. And that was like the first elimination diet I went on. And I went through like really severe detox. I was dizzy and nauseous and couldn't sleep, and I was shaking and like hot and cold flashes, and I couldn't get in touch with the practitioner I was working with. And I go, I don't know what to do, but I like can't function right now. And this is really scary to me. And I just like, I'll never forget that. And I never want someone to feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I have also been through something very similar. I will never forget it. I think it was the SIBO diet. Why am I blanking on the name right now?
The low FODMAP.
Yeah, the low FODMAP diet, which I had been given to from he was an MD, but like a / holistic practitioner. And I had been handed that diet so many times without like follow-ups and guidance and all the things. Same thing happened to me. Was on it super strict, and I was also following it probably way more intensely than I should have been, given like the eating disorder part of it. And I had a horrible like Herx reaction essentially. And if you don't know what a Herx reaction is, it's a very bad detox reaction that can essentially feel like the flu. And I did throw up. Like, it was awful. So we don't do that to people. We're not going to leave you hanging like that. That's not why we're here. Yeah, we want to be here to support you through this and give you the best guidance that we can.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so this is the first episode. We will do bigger topics kind of following up after this, but we definitely wanted to share our stories a little bit and have you get to know us a little bit more before we start to dive into this, where we're coming from and why we approach things a little differently than most other practitioners out there. So please be sure to follow us, subscribe, depending on where you're listening to this. If you can give us a 5-star rating, if you feel like that resonates with you, we would really, really, really appreciate it. And we cannot wait to start sharing and doing deeper dives into other topics here. So be sure to follow along and listen, and we can't wait to share more here with you and help you along in your healing journey. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.